This is Mike Wall. Welcome back to another episode of the Agent Revolution podcast, the place where we deconstruct the biggest challenges facing today's real estate agents so that they can build a sustainable, profitable, but most of all, fulfilling real estate business. Our mission is to build a community of well-informed agents and investors who better serve their clients. Today, we're talking to my man, Sarry Ibrahim, and we're talking about creating predictable income in an unpredictable world. And before we do that, please keep in mind, you can get more great free material at meetmikewall.com. That's meetmikewall.com. Sarry, are you ready to rock and roll, my man?
Hey, Mike, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, brother. I'm actually really excited about today's topic. You know, real estate agents, we work really hard for our money, man. And certainly we're always open to ideas to be able to preserve that money that we work for. And I know that's true for both real estate agents and investors. And I love the fact that, you know, you're here to talk about a way that can help us hang on to our money, and not just hang on to it, but I mean, make it grow, make it thrive, right? And that's really important, man. But before we do that, Sarry, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I was born and raised here, lived here my whole life. And I started in this industry, in the financial services industry, about 5 years ago when I was in grad school. I was doing my master's degree in business, and I started working at Allstate Insurance. And I was working with a lot of business owners, real estate investors, and more on the insurance side, just like protecting their assets. Yeah. And then made the change to healthcare. So I was working for companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield, Humana, Cigna Health Spring. And I was working with a lot of retirees, helping them make the transition between their employer plans onto their own individual Medicare plans. And I did that for a couple of years. And during that time, one of my clients asked me if I could help him with life insurance. And he said, there's a life insurance policy. It has cash value. It builds up over time. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Yeah. But I told him I would do more research. I would get back to him. So I did. And I went to Amazon. And that's one of the ways I like to learn. I like to read books. And I went to Amazon and I searched for books about life insurance. And I came across this one book called The Bank on Yourself Revolution by Pamela Yellen.
Yeah.
And the book pretty much talks about the strategy. It's the bank on yourself strategy. It's using a way to grow safe, predictable wealth, regardless of market conditions. And as I was reading this book, I was like, you know, this doesn't only help my Medicare client. It could help anyone. Yeah. And then after that, there had a part that said that you can go through like an 8-week training program to become a bank on yourself professional. And I did that, and then founded the company Financial Asset Protection. And then since then, I've kind of niched down to real estate agents and real estate investors. That's the majority of my clients, and pretty much helping them grow safe, predictable wealth, you know, regardless of market conditions, and also helping them have liquidity, have access to that money. And that's how we kind of connected today, and why I want to share this on your podcast.
Yeah, dude, it's a great topic. And I mean, you know, as you become, like, you go through an evolution as a real estate agent, right? Or at least most of us do. It's that, you know, first you're trading money for time, right? Or time for money, essentially. And what you know, every hour you're grinding, but the minute you make a sale, you're always you're starting over. You know what I mean? Every time you're starting over. You make a sale, you have to start over. And it's like, at some point you want to make that money, that income that you're creating, work for you. Mm-hmm. And you know, I talked about that evolutionary stage. That's how you start out. And then you start to realize, hey, you know, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I'd like to take some of my income, invest it, and help it work for me, right? So that I'm not always good as my last transaction, right? And so I think it's an important topic, only because, like, we're helping agents take that next step into taking all that money, hopefully, that they're making, and investing it to help it work for them, so that they don't necessarily have to work so hard their entire lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of agents, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they go through this like cycle where it's like they start off like, you know, it's very difficult to make money, and then you start gaining clientele and you're closing deals, and then you have a good problem, and that's, what do you do with that money that you're making now? Yeah, you know. And you mentioned something earlier, preserve. Like, I think you have to preserve your money, because it's not, at the end of the day, especially as an entrepreneur, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep.
That's exactly right, dude. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, you know, I guess my question for you would be, how much money would you need to have in order to get started? Is it in my eye, like it would never be too late to get started, right? Like, I mean, as soon as you start making money, to me, it would be like, I don't care how much you're going to contribute, as long as you're contributing something.
Yeah, exactly. There really is no minimum or maximum. Typically, like I started my first policy with $300 a month, just putting in $300 a month. And then I've worked with real estate investors who put in like $400,000 into these policies, you know? So there's kind of a really big gap. I think the first step for a lot of people to do is to just understand this concept, like what it is, how it works, you know, and to kind of become familiar with it, and then, you know, use it within their business. You don't need to be wealthy to do the strategy. And instead, I think it's the opposite. I think that this strategy helps you become wealthy because it's pretty much helping you put your money somewhere, retaining your money, but also at the same time having liquidity. You're able to access this money. So it's not an either or approach. It's not either, you know, I use a strategy or I invest in real estate or invest in the stock market. It's a way where you could kind of do all those things at the same time. You could fund this solution, borrow from it, use it to invest in your next real estate deal or in your real estate business as an agent, and then pretty much become your own source of financing, helping you retain the money, helping you gain interest even when you're using the money.
Yeah. Are there some tax advantages to it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the cash value grows tax deferred, meaning that you don't have to claim that on your taxes every year, even if there are gains. When you take out the money, in most situations, it's tax free because you've used after tax dollars to fund the policy. And then of course, since we are talking about life insurance, there's a life insurance component to it that is also tax free too. So it's pretty much tax-free all around. Some situations that you might have to pay taxes on the gains, but that's about 95% of the time, there's tax advantages.
Awesome, man. Well, talk about what it is and how it works.
Yeah, so pretty much, it's pretty much using whole life insurance. And for those of you not familiar with whole life insurance, it's pretty much whole life insurance has two aspects. One is it has, excuse me, it has a life insurance part, and then it has a cash value. Sorry, excuse me, sorry.
You're good.
And it has a cash value part.
That's why I always keep water by my desk, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah.
All day, and I end up doing that.
So then, so the policy has cash value, and the cash value is like a savings account inside of the policy. Yeah. You have access to it just like the same way how you would go to a bank, you'd have access to it. Except the difference is with life insurance, that cash value grows at a guaranteed rate from an insurance company. And people always wonder, how is it guaranteed? How is the insurance company guaranteeing the returns? And the reason why is because insurance companies are highly regulated on a federal and state level on what they could do with their money. They can only typically put it in a few places, like the bond market or other real estate investments. So typically when there's a market crash, insurance companies still have their assets. They still have the bond market. They still have the real estate portfolio. So they don't lose that much money, and they're able to still maintain their guarantees. And then also, let's say, for example, you've built up the policy. You have $100,000 in cash value in the policy. And let's say you want to, you need $50,000 to invest in a deal. Yeah. You can go to the policy, borrow $50,000 from the company that it's with, leveraging your $100,000 as cash value, meaning that it doesn't subtract from the balance. It just borrows against it. And now you have like a personal loan between you and the insurance company. Meanwhile, your account is still growing, earning interest and dividends on the entire $100,000. And then what happens is, let's say you invest in the property, you buy for $50,000. 1 year later, you sell it for $75,000, excluding renovations, other expenses. But let's just say you sell it for $75,000. You make $25,000 profit on that. You also made money in the policy too at the same time. So your cash did two things for you at the same time. Now, let's say you just chose just straight cash, then you would no longer be able to earn interest on that money. And let's say you borrow from somebody else, then you would pay the interest to them. So this way it kind of brings it in the middle where you're earning interest on your money while still being able to use it. That's just kind of one function of what you could do with this. Yeah.
So what you're saying is you can take out a loan to buy an investment property, right? And you're borrowing against the value of the loan, not necessarily taking money out of the insurance policy, and you're paying yourself back at whatever payment and interest, but you're keeping the interest as well.
So your policy cash value, let's say an example, $100,000, it's earning interest and dividends. Yeah. And then you're buying the capital. You're pretty much paying the insurance company and paying them interest. But while you're doing that, you're earning interest on your money. So it creates an arbitrage, meaning that the cost of capital becomes cheaper for you to use from your policy than anywhere else because you're earning interest on that money.
Is there any max to how much you can borrow against the money you have in? Is it half?
It's up to 90% of the cash value.
90%. Okay. Wow. Yeah. That's pretty awesome. And so when you're getting something like this, is there like with a 401k, right? There's a maximum to how much you can contribute each year, right?
Yes.
Is there a maximum to how much you can contribute?
So yes and no. So they're technically on a national basis, on legal wise, there's no maximum. However, when somebody applies for an insurance policy, there's underwriting involved. And part of that underwriting is how much you can get insurance for. Typically, it's about 25 times your annual income.
Yeah.
So if you make $100,000 a year, you can get up to $2.5 million in life insurance coverage. That's one way. And the second way, of course, that there could be limits is, let's say you decide to do a policy. Let's say you want to do a policy that's $10,000 a year. Now, every year there's room to add in a little bit more into the policy on top of the premiums. And then whatever you add in extra goes directly to the cash value. You do this to, of course, build up the cash value, but there's a limit to that. And it's an IRS limit, a tax limit, because if you add in more, let's say, for example, it's $10,000 a year, and then you have room to add an extra $3,000 a year on top of that. If you were to add in an extra $10,000 on top of that, then it would become a modified endowment contract, making the whole thing taxable now. So pretty much there's underwriting limits, and then there are taxable limits after you get approved for the policy.
Yeah. How would you compare it to a 401k? What would be if you were representing this life insurance policy, right? And somebody else was representing the 401k, what would be your argument to say, hey, this is a better investment?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So pretty much I would take both of them, the 401k and the life insurance. And then I would simply ask, 4 or 5 questions around these. Like, number one, what's the fees? How much does it cost to implement the whole life? And then what are the recurring fees on both sides? Number two, how much control do I have? Number three, what is the volatility like, or the market risk behind it? And then number four, the limits, of course. So I think that to answer from the top now. So number one, the fee structure in a 401k is typically 1% to 2% every year. Whether the account goes up or down, they're still taking out 1% or 2% a year, and that can be quite expensive. So that's one downside. The second downside is control. You actually don't have very much control in a 401k. You have to wait until you're 59 and a half to touch the money. And then if you take it out sooner than that, there's taxes involved, 10% penalty plus taxes, ordinary income. With the whole life policy, there's no penalties for accessing the money. Yeah. And then risk too, with the whole life companies, as we've mentioned already, where they're backed by insurance companies who have been around for over 160 years, who have positive track records, and who have been paying dividends and interest. And then on the 401k side, parts of a 401k, depending on how it's structured and the risk levels, parts of it are invested in the stock market. So like, for example, in 2008, when people had money in a 401k, a lot of people lost a lot of money in their 401ks. Some, maybe 60% of their account values were wiped out. That could happen if there's a market crash. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying if you did have money in a 401k and there was a market crash, it's pretty much going to affect your 401k as opposed to the life insurance side. So right. Kind of some of the arguments.
So you had mentioned before too, like if let's say you bought a property for 50 grand and you sold it for 75, and obviously the margin there is $25,000. Would you then just put that money back in the life insurance policy, or would that be something that you could potentially cash out and use on down payment for your next project? How would that work?
So I think the best thing to do would be, of course, once you sell the property, pay back the loan. Plus, if you have room in the policy, you could add in that $25,000 additional on top of that to go into the cash value, and then borrow again when you come across that new deal. So that'd be the best thing to do. But not everybody would have. I don't think in most situations you won't have room to add in an extra $25,000. So you can probably start a new policy, or just pay back the loan, pay back the balance, add in as much as you possibly can up to that IRS limit. And then the rest of it, maybe start a new policy, or just, put it on the side and use only cash for that. So, but ideally it'd be best to put as much as you can back in there, because think about it, you're going to earn compound interest on that money, and you always have liquidity. So in my opinion, it's better to have the money sitting there than to sit in just a regular checking account or savings account at a bank.
Sure. Now, what would be like a typical interest rate that you would earn back on the money you'd invested?
So the cash value pretty much grows 2 ways. One is through interest, and the other is through dividends. Both interest and dividends, it comes out to about 4 to 6% every year compound. Okay. And then when you access the money, you're borrowing at 5% simple interest. So pretty much that's how the cash value outpaces what you're paying into, is because you're earning compound and you're buying at simple, creating more of a leverage in terms of how much you're earning versus how much you're spending to borrow that money or to use that money.
Yeah. And explain the difference to our audience between compound and simple interest.
Yeah. So compound interest is, for example, let's say you take out $1,000 loan and you have to pay 10% interest on it. It'd pretty much be, and let's just say you didn't pay the interest or you didn't make any payments. It'd be 1,000 plus $100, 10% interest on $1,100, and then 10% interest on $1,100. So then it'd be like 1,000, $121, compounded on that, and it keeps going. That's credit cards are usually compound interest, and that's the reason why a lot of people have a hard time getting out of credit card debt, is because it keeps compounding. Whereas simple interest is $1,000, 10% interest. You only owe for that whole year. You only owe $1,000. So 10%, sorry, $100, 10% of $1,000. In other words, it doesn't it's not interest on interest. It's only interest on the entire balance on an annual basis. Right. So that's the main differences. And then of course, on your policy, you're earning compound interest, which is what you want. You want to be on the compound earning side. But of course, when you're buying, you want to be on the simple interest side.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. Is real estate the only thing you can buy with the policy if you want to buy?
So the cool thing about this, Mike, is that you could do anything you want with this policy. There's no restrictions. It's not like you have to, put it in certain places. You don't have to have a separate LLC or S Corp or C Corp. You could do whatever you want. You could do it for real estate. You could do it to buy leads as an agent. You could do anything you want with the money. There's no restrictions on it at all. There's no credit checks. There's no credit history. There's no collateral. The policy itself is self-collateralized.
Yeah, that's great, man. And so do the policies have like an expiration date? Or like, how does that work?
Yeah. So depending on how we structure it in the beginning, it could have like, for example, we could do a 5-year policy where you only pay for 5 years. It could be a single premium where it's only just one time, one payment. It could be 7 years, 10 years. It could be infinite, just keeps going until you pass away. It could be 20 years. It all depends. We always do a financial analysis with clients. Pretty much just us asking questions, getting to know the financial situation of the client, their needs, wants, objectives, all that comes into it. And then after the financial analysis call, then we structure the policy for them. We show them like, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, you mentioned, you don't want to participate in any stock market risk. This policy won't have it. Like pretty much use what they've mentioned in the financial analysis to build out an adequate solution for them. And it could be, again, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, 20-year policy.
How do you make this appeal to younger people, Sarry?
Yeah. So an interesting stat that I came across is like 60% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in a bank account.
Yeah.
And I think that's not an income problem. That's a savings problem. We spend too much money quickly in this country. We have access to money very rapidly, debit cards, credit cards, quick pay, mobile apps, it's really easy for us to access our money. And I think that's the reason why we have a hard time spending or saving it. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, you're younger, if you could figure out a way to create some speed bumps or obstacles around you and your money, I think that'll increase the chances of you saving your money. For example, let's say you're putting in $300 a month into a policy and you're doing this for a couple of years and you have like, let's say just $5,000 in this account, nothing dramatic, but let's say that you want to access this money. You want to use it to buy something, to go on a vacation, whatever you want. In order for you to access that money, you have to fill out a form, send it to the insurance company, wait 3 to 5 business days, and they send you the money to whichever account you want. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because you have to go through those additional steps to access the money, and you have to borrow, of course. And it's a good thing too, because it makes you think more now about what you're going to use the money for. It's going to create some obstacles between you and your money, reducing the likelihood of you even touching that money. You could if you wanted to, if you really needed to. But I think that's smart for a lot of people to do, is kind of create some more boundaries around you and your money, so that way it's not super liquid and just you're always just living paycheck to paycheck. You want to have those obstacles, and you want to also think, of course, long term, which is difficult to do when you're younger, because it doesn't really matter when you're younger to think long term. But if you can have this financial vehicle that almost forces you to save, I think it'll be super smart to implement that when you're young, of course.
Is any specific age better than the next to start doing this?
I mean, since we are dealing with compound interest, compound interest is always better, yesterday than it's always better sooner than later. So if you're, 20, 21 years old and you have the ability to fund this, for 40 years, that's better than funding it for 5 years, because you can get more years and more compound interest in, and just kind of have recycling for you longer than, 5 years. Then if you're 65 years old, wanted to do this, it'd be better younger, of course, and sooner would be better, since we are dealing with compound interest.
Yeah. So if it's life insurance, the ultimate goal is death, right? No. I say that tongue in cheek, but what I mean is that, so let's say I created one of these policies, right? And I created it for 40 years, but I passed away in 30.
Mhm.
What happens at that point?
So every year, as you're funding the policy, you're building up the cash value, and then you also have life insurance, like a
Mhm.
death benefit, and then both of those grow every single year. So if you started it, 30 years later, you'd probably have, I don't know, just rough numbers, like $1 million in life insurance. So what would pretty much happen is the policy would cancel, it would pay your beneficiary all of the life insurance, and pretty much, it'd be like a life insurance policy, but it would appreciate over time. So it's not, you're not buying the same insurance you bought 30 years ago. It's increasing in value, which of course means that, as you get older, you're going to have probably more expenses, and the standard of living increases, right? Inflation. So you need to have something that outpaces inflation.
Yeah. You talked about the bet on yourself strategy, right? And how does that tie into this?
Yeah, so pretty much it's the bank on yourself strategy. It's pretty much a marketing term. It's also known as the infinite banking concept, and they both use the underlying asset is dividend paying whole life insurance.
Yeah.
So pretty much whole life insurance, using it for cash value purposes, for investing, for savings. That's pretty much what the bank on yourself strategy is.
Okay. Do you have people like, is there a book recommendation you can make for the bank on yourself strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first book is called The Bank on Yourself Revolution by Pamela Yellen.
Okay.
And the second book is Becoming Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
Yeah.
This sounds really cool, man. I like the idea of being able to safe harbor your cash. Obviously, no one likes to pay taxes, and everyone likes to build wealth. It's just a matter of making that decision. And I think when you can create creative ways to be able to do that, especially for real estate agents who are notoriously big spenders. They make a lot of money. They don't invest a lot.
Yep.
And I'd love to see that change. That was one of the reasons I chose EXP, is because of the revenue share and stock award component, right? Is that, I sold real estate at Keller Williams, right? But there was not an opportunity to be an owner there, right? There was no opportunity for stock awards. And, the funny thing is the stock, since I joined EXP, has gone from $7 a share to $75 a share in less than 3 years.
Wow.
And they just sent me a check for $400,000.
Oh, nice.
And so, and what's really cool is that they've been taking that money. Like, I've allowed them to take 5% out of each one of my checks to buy stock at a 10% discount. And I just set it and forget it. You know what I mean? And so this is very much like that, in that, if you're trying to build wealth, you invest, right? You don't spend, you invest. And, Jim Rome always talks about the 70-10-10. And it's it's basically meaning that you invest 10% of your income, you spend 10% of your income, and then you basically live off the rest. And so for you, it's like you've gotten, so I can tell that you've educated yourself to the point to where you're passionate about this. It's not something that you would, let's be honest, this is not something, investing is not something that's an easy conversation with the typical real estate agent. Usually it takes, the real estate agent who's been in the business for a while, who understands that they want to build a better life for themselves, and they know they're not going to consistently be able to, or they're not going to consistently want to sell properties until they're 85 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I love the idea, man. Well, how do people, if people want to find out more about, getting involved with this, the bank on yourself strategy, how do they get in touch with you, and what does that system look like?
Yeah, so they can go to our company website. It's finassetprotection.com, FIN assetprotection.com. And then there's a link. You can schedule a free appointment. And most of our clients are all over the country, so it's fine. It could be virtual. And there's a link. You can schedule an appointment. It could be over the phone or over Zoom. And also, if they reach out and they say they came from your podcast, I will send them a free copy of whichever book they want, either The Bank on Yourself Revolution or Becoming Your Own Banker, as free to them. Awesome, man.
Well, I really appreciate you taking some time to come on the show, man. And I know you're a busy dude, and it's always enlightening to bring somebody on from your realm, because, oftentimes we just talk about, skill set, right? We talk about, calling for sell by owners or calling expireds or lead generation. And I think we ought to create more opportunities to talk about wealth building. And so I think it's only fitting that we have you as our first episode of the new year, that we're talking about wealth building in 2021. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
No, we covered a lot. We covered the taxes, the liquidity part, comparing it to a 401k or investing in the stock market. Yeah, we covered a lot. I appreciate all the questions and being on here.
Yeah, no worries, man. Well, as usual, I love sharing these stories week after week, because I know this show is literally changing agents' lives, financial lives, that is, my own included. Do me a big favor. If you know someone that might enjoy the podcast, please share it with them. If you like the podcast, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like Mr. Sarry's episode, leave us a 5-star review. Don't forget to visit MikeWallLive.com, where you can get 8 hours of absolutely free real estate business training. Thanks for listening, and I will see you again soon. Sarry, thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Mike.
You got it.